2022 marked more than half a century of Dario Argento's directorial career. It is modern, it is different, and it is certainly not his best work. But ultimately, it's just fantastic to know that he's still directing. I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, this episode's going to be a little bit less formal than previous ones. I don't have a script in the same way that I have for recent ones. I have been very busy and haven't completed the latest chapter of my book, or the latest first draft of a chapter. But leading into the study that I'm hopefully about to be confirmed to be doing, a doctoral degree looking basically at Dario Argento's films, which is pretty damn exciting. I thought it was best that I should actually finally catch up with his latest installment. And, you know, I guess this is a little bit of first thoughts. I don't know that I've done very many films in this series that I wasn't previously very familiar with. There's been a couple. I think I've watched one or two from less prominent directors for the purpose of the podcast. But to watch an Argento film that's actually new to me for the purpose of a podcast is pretty exciting. And I'll tell you, my first impressions, as in my immediate impressions, were pretty good, but I was a little bit hesitant. So, you know, I love the vibe and the atmosphere of those sort of opening scenes. Really, really good stuff. But it has that sheen straight away of like a modern, low budget, forgotten type of film where, because it's modern, you know, the quality is very, very good, but there's something a little bit lacking in its production. You know, it's quite difficult to describe, but it's almost too HD, and it sort of feels like it doesn't have the griminess and the graininess that you know, naturally comes with older films, but also is reflective of that attention to detail that Argento has always had. And at the end of the day, I don't know that this film quite has the attention to detail. And I want to be fair. I mean, I believe he was in his 80s already when this film came out. So, you know, I do hope that this podcast doesn't sort of devolve into me being ultra critical, because, you know, there are elements of this film that have genuine merit. But if I could give an overarching criticism of the film, it's that it's got probably most of the pieces that you would want in a good horror film and even in a good Argento film, but they're not quite put together. And I emphasize most of the pieces because that extra touch isn't quite there. You know, Argento, I'm sort of, you know, there's something very nice about the fact that in the year 2022, he's still directing a film that sort of matches two people together that aren't naturally matched, and they go on a bit of an adventure to survive and stuff. The problem, though, is that Argento, in the past, and I think I'm sure I've mentioned this many times on this podcast, in the past, you can tell that Argento is he cares a lot about his characters. And like almost I get the impression that he put more effort into his stories than his visuals and the atmosphere, because the visuals and the atmosphere are very, very natural to him. This film actually felt like he did care about his characters again. And, you know, I'd say sometime during the 80s, he focused much more on, I'm the style and visual guy, so that was his focus, whereas in the past he was just so good at it that it just naturally came out. And even as a way of sort of enhancing what he was trying to show in his characters. Unfortunately, in this film, whilst I get the impression he does care about this idea, it's a sort of strange concept. The care and the attention to detail isn't quite there. Like the little boy, he does not seem fleshed out at all. It sort of feels as though the fact that he's got a really sad backstory and the fact that he rejects Diana, I think, he rejects Diana in the first place. She smashes he smashes the Nintendo or whatever it is that she buys him. And then within like a minute, he's like, oh, actually, no, I like this woman. And then he goes from hating her to like risking his life to save her multiple times throughout the film. And I just don't think look, as much as anything, it might just be that there isn't enough of the characters there. Like they're like cardboard cutouts, right? And the one that I always immediately return to is Deep Red, where it would have been easy, I think, for David Hemmings and Dario Argento to not make much of those characters because there's not necessarily a lot there, I suspect, on the paper, but the actors really bring it out. Same with Susie Kendall and Tony Mazzanti in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And really, most of his main characters in that sort of classic early to mid 70s Giallo period. But to some extent, I think most of his great characters have been really enhanced by great performances and great atmosphere. And unfortunately, these aren't great performances, and the atmosphere it's just not quite there. Nonetheless, I do think, as I said, I do think there is some merit. Like the opening section of the film, like that opening scene with that park, it's interesting, there's merit to it. There's atmosphere, and I guess it seems very much like a film that Argento wanted atmosphere to return, right? That he wanted people to really feel this film, and I'm not saying he fails necessarily, but I think he tries to do so in a very, maybe a slightly lacking way. So it was probably about half an hour into the film, and it occurred to me that like the background music had almost not stopped at any point. And I don't know what portion of the film that it's playing for, but there's music. It feels like 80% of the time. And there's merit to that idea, right? It's sort of like those songs that there might be a drum beat that just stays consistent throughout the course of an entire song, even when the rest of the song is quite varying. And it's a fascinating approach. But as it went on, I felt it became a little bit distracting. And the issue is that there are moments in the film where, like, the music doesn't seem to adjust for the mood. So it'll be there and it'll build up maybe slightly, but then there'll be like brutal murder and violence scenes. And the music, it doesn't really shift. It's like it doesn't know what's going on. And whilst, again, there's merit to that kind of thing if it's done really, really effectively. But I'm not sure it is done all that effectively. So, let's get into a couple of the themes and the ideas of the film. So the initial section of the film sort of establishes that this is a film, about prostitution to some extent. And I think we meet a couple of prostitutes. There's a pretty cool murder of a woman walking in a car park, and she gets sort of strangled, and it's like all these people run out and they see her. They see that she's had a throat cut and she's bleeding out, and everyone's like, oh my God, and everyone's really miserable, but no one seems to call the police. And in a way, it feels silly because you wouldn't expect that in a movie, but at the same time, I did sort of reflect on that and think everyone's just like panicked and don't know what to do. And I do wonder if that would happen sometimes in a situation like that in real life. But so then we see this overweight man, and like I'm sort of expecting, because he seems like generic wealthy overweight man who's going to treat women like shit when he goes and sleeps with them. But then there's that fairly touching scene at some point. I think it might be after she's blind. Yeah, of course, because he says that she asks if he's okay that she's blind, and he says, well, yeah, because I always thought I was ugly and it's better if you can't see me, blah blah blah. And it's like, yeah, okay. I think I see what the film maybe is doing, but it's not. I feel like Argento's early films were completely like preoccupied with these little relationships between men and women, and I sort of feel like this film was attempting to return to that, but it just doesn't quite return to that, because it's almost paying lip service to the idea. Because as much as it is nice to think that this guy who's using a prostitute is very kind to her, and I mean, I don't know, but to be frank, I actually assume most people that use prostitutes are nice to them, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's like we're sort of expecting him to be a jerk, and he's not, but it doesn't seem to be in aid of anything. Really, none of it seems to be in aid of much. And there's that guy that, like, she says that he stinks, and he says that he works with dogs all day, and then, he gets a bit upset about it. Now, this is I don't know if you'd call it a trend, but look, I haven't watched the 2009 film Giallo for a long time, but I remember being, I don't know, irritated might be too strong a word, but I remember I'll use the word, irritated when they revealed who the killer was really early. Because, and look, we like our formulas, and that's probably why I do a podcast about Italian horror films and largely talk about gialli. So, to be fair, I'm probably expecting things, and I don't want my expectations subverted and all that. But the structure of a giallo film, if you're not, and it was literally called giallo, is like we know that there's a killer out there. We learn a little bit about their motivations, and then we, slowly it's uncovered, and then we find out who it is, and the motivations are varying degrees of ridiculous and whatever. But so in that film, maybe it was like, oh, it's a bit of a surprise that he's being revealed early. And I remember sort of thinking, oh, is this really the killer, or is this like a double killer situation, like Tenebrae? Like, what are we doing? And in the end, it didn't really feel like we were doing much of anything. In this film, it's like, oh, it was the guy that she said that he stinks too. And it's like, oh, is that it? Like, is that it? And then furthermore, there's not any like he, I think on 2 or 3 occasions, sarcastically or even facetiously refers to the fact that she said that he stinks, and he seems to be annoyed about that. And, obviously we would assume that someone who is told by a prostitute they stink, who then decides he's going to go on a killing spree, obviously we assume he's got slightly more deeply seated issues than just the fact that he was insulted. But it's like, is the film sort of trying to or bothering to go further than that? Because don't get me wrong, like, it seems probably more plausible than most of his films, or most giallo films, even. That, like, in real life, I'm sure all kinds of people use prostitutes, but there's probably some loser types and some extremely, like, unhinged loser types. I'm sure there are some of them. And it sort of makes sense that maybe that this is probably something that happens. But, like, it's not really that interesting in a film, and he's sort of, yeah, I think there are times when they want to, like, make out that he's, like, super unhinged, but it's a bit, it's just a little bit incomplete, I think. It's a little bit incomplete. Look, as for the actually, I'll get into the music, because I was just having another listen to it before I started recording. Because when I watched the film, a day ago, my first impression was like, oh, that has a real Halloween 7 or 8 vibe for anyone who's seen those films. And I thought, how do I overreacted to that? And then I watched it. Oh, sorry, I listened to the music again just before recording, and I was like, if we were up to, like, Halloween 13 by now, this music could almost pass as it, right? And like, don't get me wrong, I know that they've had sequels and remakes and all kinds of shit, but specifically the pattern of where that music was devolving to in that series, this one actually sounds like an extension of that. And, like, I'm not necessarily against that style of music, but it just feels like it's in a different place. And for an Argento film, it does feel a little bit cheap. Like, there's always something startling about like, in the great films that he's done, there's something startling about the music. Certainly startling about Goblin, but I'd say striking about Morricone in the earlier films. And this score, it's got that energy to it. And from that perspective, it's okay, because I think it is an energetic film. But how would I put this? I think Goblin takes already high octane, high energy Argento films, and I'm thinking of obviously Deep Red and Suspiria, but even Tenebrae to some extent, because I think it's some extent of Goblin. I think it's one or two of their members, and it takes these films and it moves them into this almost surreal hyper reality. And obviously, Suspiria is meant to be that. But there are elements of Deep Red and Suspiria that are almost moving into the supernatural. And that's almost entirely because of what Goblin does. I think in this film, it feels like the film wants to be energetic and stuff. But it's held back by, I think, its scripting limitations. Because, like, there's that scene where the two cops are they're searching for the young boy. Chin, I think his name is. And, like, he's with Diana. It's not necessarily made. I think it's something like someone said that they saw him with Diana. And she's all defending him and stuff. And she gets them out of the room. And then the male cop runs in there and gets attacked by the dog. And it's sort of like, you need music to add energy to this, because it sort of feels very forced, it really does. And I think part of the problem as well, you use characters like this as devices for, like, minor characters to help formulate our understanding of the main characters, right? So I get that. But I think I think in general it's done in a sort of like, well, we are unambiguously on the side of the person that you're trying to make us on the side of. And whilst that's pretty well the case, I think Diana's a reasonable character. I enjoyed her. Um, it also feels very like, well, you are harboring this child. You know, are the police not right to do this? And then it sort of feels odd because, like, because I'm thinking that when they get killed, you know, they go back there and the van. We'll get to the van in a moment. They go back to the address and the van chases them down and the guy gets run over and then the killer gets out and stabs the woman. It's pretty brutal and stuff. But at the same time, the film has just positioned these people as the antithesis to what Diana's trying to do. And that makes it challenging because it's like, well, logically, I don't think it's right that they get killed. But if I'm now on their side, then it sort of makes me feel more like, okay, well, you know, maybe if Diana had just given up the child, blah, blah, blah. I think you understand what I'm saying. So there are narrative issues in making us feel the way we're meant to feel. And I think in Argento's best work, you know, we feel exactly how he wants us to feel, you know. So, you know, Van's being creepy is, you know, it's a bit of a modern trope in cinema. It seems to happen in horror cinema, especially. It seems to happen quite a lot. Bit of stranger danger type stuff, and this is often how they do it. So I'm not against it, but it's sort of like, I remember before I'd ever watched any Game of Thrones, and up to this point, I've probably watched about 2.5 episodes. You know, people would have "Winter is Coming" tattoos, and then they would go "Winter is Coming" to each other, and it's all very tedious and silly. But I sort of had it in my head that, like, it was, well, maybe it's said once in the show and it was an iconic line, so everyone said it. And then I watched an episode or two, and I found that they were saying "Winter is Coming" all the time. So why do I bring that up? When I'm reading little plot synopses on Wikipedia and elsewhere before I watch the film, they make mention of this white van, and it has this this mystique to it, you know. It's like, oh, it's going to be parked over there, and we're going to see it occasionally, and it's going to be like, oh my god, there's the white van. It's happened. You know, it's sort of like when you see Gollum in the Two Towers for the first time. It's like, oh wow, it is what I imagined, but it's, you know, it's quite striking. But in this film, it sort of gets to the point of it being like comical, just the pure ubiquity of the van. And then it'll be, you know, I think it showed up in one of the trailers I watched. I think it's Dario Argento says that you can see the white van. She's describing it to Diana, and it's like, oh yeah, that seems creepy. But when it actually plays in the film, it's like, by that point, we're so used to seeing the white van around that it's like, well, yeah, of course. And then it's in like multiple scenes chasing cars. It rams Diana to run over Chin's parents. And it's sort of like these creepy, inconspicuous vans, you know, they're such an effective device to create tension. But we see it so much that it ceases to have any tension. I mean, we know that the guy driving it is going to kill people and stuff. But, you know, it just sort of falls a little bit flat eventually because, like, okay, well, I've seen this 1,000 times, and I guess when you think back to classic Argento films. Like you might watch them and then, you think about them a week later. What is it that sticks with you? Like for mine in The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, it's the beginning and the end. It's the fun of the investigation. In Deep Red, it's the interaction between Dario Nickelodeon and David Hemmings, and the humor and the investigation, the vibrant color of it. Suspiria, it's the atmosphere, it's the scene, it's specific moments, the sort of mindfuck of it all. And in this, it's a van and a dude. And I think if it was doing what it was trying to do, it would be that when it was revealed who the guy was, it was done in a terrifying way. Now, I admit Italian horror films, Gialli, have a way of often it can be the case that the killer's reveal is a little bit disappointing, because it's like, it'll be like, is it that guy, or they're quite pathetic or something. But when the reveal is that they're pathetic, it can be done really effectively. I'm thinking of the film Torso, which is just one of the great giallo films. The reveal is very cool, but it's the professor, and then in the reveal he's quite pathetic. But there's a comedic element to it, where it's like almost the very fact that he's been unmasked seems to be where he's become so pathetic. So you can, it's a difficult line to straddle, because killers in horror films, when they make it to the end of the film, tend to have a certain imperviousness to them throughout the film. They seem to be showing up at the most inconvenient times. They seem uncatchable. We don't know who they are. We don't know when they're going to strike, blah, blah, blah. And then to almost compensate for, well, how are we going to explain this away that we actually managed to catch them? I was like, they're silly and they're idiots and they know what they're doing. But of course, the obvious problem then is like, okay, well, don't they look a bit, wouldn't they have not been able to do what they've done? And it's like, yeah, okay. When they're done well, though, it's satisfying. And it's partly satisfying because it's just like 2-3 minutes at the end and it's bang, and then we're home and it's good. The reveal that it's this guy is so disappointing and so early that it makes you go, is there a second guy? Is there another guy? And there's not. So he just really is a big old jerk that also happens to be a murderer. There doesn't seem to be anything deeper going on. So, he's driving around a lot, and I guess he's sort of deranged or whatever. But what are his motivations? His motivation seems to be literally that she said that he stinks. So that's a little bit disappointing. I realize why I write scripts. I know this has been a little bit rambling. So I'll wrap it up I'll just sort of talk about the ending a little bit. Diana gives him that big shower with the hose, right? She's like hosing him the fuck down. And it's poetic, right? Because he stinks. And it's sort of at this moment that it was like, all right, Dario, you haven't directed a film for 10 years, but you feel like you've written a script or been part of a script, or you're making a film that just, the idea needed an extra 15, 20, 30 minutes of screen time to flesh it out a little bit. Because, like, if this is your big poetic ending, you know, then it's like it isn't quite the lady then at Deep Red getting decapitated by the jury despite having had that ambiguous sort of masculine. It doesn't quite have that. It's not the decapitation at the end of Four Flies. So it's like, okay, have you really put the amount of effort into this film that you would like to? And I can only speculate that he probably did, but this is the part where probably a lot of what I've said is seeming unfair, and I'll acknowledge that. The truth is, look, I don't want you to leave and think what a big old negative bastard that Italian horror guy is. So I want to conclude with this point. There is a reason why people whose vocation is to entertain us, be they sportsmen, be they musicians, be they artists of any kind, it is often the case that in fact, I would say it is usually the case, that those who have very long careers, the end bit is not great. And there's a reason for that. You only get to be in your prime once. And whilst I think Argento did some meritorious stuff in the 90s and 2000s, he was already on the decline 47 years ago, in my opinion. The fact that, like, to me, it's a golden age, in my opinion, the first 4 Giallo films that he did. And it's only really a personal gripe of mine that Suspiria is not quite as great as a lot of people think it is. But anyway, if you go on for a very long time, I think there's a natural fact that you will decline because you've already done the thing that you're good at. And unfortunately, in the case of a filmmaker, Argento is not particularly relevant in 2022. Certainly not to the kinds of people that decide how much money you get. I think we can all remember the story of the Sandman, if that's what it was called, with supposedly Iggy Pop and the Indiegogo campaign, and it just never quite happened. And that was slated for 2014. So he was already unable to cobble money together to make films at that point. It is quite impressive that a film so linked to streaming and efficient filmmaking in terms of budget, shall we say, that it still is directed by Argento, and it still has so many Argento elements, right? It's got a deranged killer going after women. It's got atmosphere. It just isn't as tight, or as there isn't the care taken to it. It's like The Hobbit in relation to the Lord of the Rings, as this is in relation to Argento's better work. There isn't the love quite put into it, or it doesn't feel like there's a love put into it, because I suspect it wasn't as possible. But I want to finally conclude on the note that it is genuinely a beautiful thing, and I mean this, that in 2022, and hopefully at some point in the future, although I believe the great man's 84 now, that he can still be directing films. Because if you, after this episode, you go and put on Dark Glasses and you watch that, and then you think, I want to watch some classic Argento, put on The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and think, my God, this was made 52 years by the same director as the one who did Dark Glasses. And that's a gift that we don't get from many directors. But from one of my all-time favorite directors, even if the modern work isn't as good, I'm very, very happy that it exists. So regardless of my thoughts on this particular film, I'm so happy that it's possible that it can still exist. I'm glad I've seen it now. And I look forward to if there will be any future installments of Argento films. And I will continue to release podcasts. It is most likely that the next one will be about phenomena and maybe a little bit of opera as well. As I said, I'm moving into towards a PhD, or towards starting it, and I'll be doing a lot of reading, and I'll be getting ideas from what I'm reading, maybe some themic stuff as well, in order for what I'll be talking about beyond the next one or two. But there'll be plenty of episodes coming up this year. I'll get a schedule sorted soon enough, so it's less inconsistent. And I look forward to you joining me for more episodes. But until then, I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and this has been the Italian Horror Guy podcast.